Monk currently is ranked as the top damage dealer in Final Fantasy XIV as of patch 6.08. Here we're using the RDPS metrics for the current Savage content from FF logs. RDPS is a key metric when comparing performance between jobs. It includes the damage you do personally plus the extra damage done by your teammates from your own raid buffs, but it does not include the extra damage you do from your teammates' buffs. The aggregate normalised scores for the current Savage tier see Monk topping the charts across the board for players hitting minimum damage requirements, average and upper levels of performance. Aggregated normalised scores take into account each job's performance for the individual raid fights, giving them an overall ranking across the raid tier in comparison to each other. Monk also remains top when looking at average scores based on DPS, which is simply the combined DPS from each fight divided by the number of fights. Generally not as good a measure for comparison given fight differences, but here it cements Monk's position at number 1. Breaking it down to fight level, Monk tops the charts in P1S, P2S and P3S. However, interestingly drops to 3rd spot in both Part 1 and Part 2 of P4S. A good reminder that nothing is completely black or white. In P4S, Black Mage tops the charts with Ninja reaching the 2nd spot. Interestingly, Ninjas only hitting the minimum raid requirements, or average numbers, fall lower than Monks doing the same, with only those ninjas heading towards the upper limits of the job scores pipping Monks' damage numbers. Possibly an indication of comparative job or player skill requirements. Back to the normalised scores across the raid tier, we see Black Mage 2nd and Dragoon rounding out the top 3. However, all the melees plus Black Mage are tightly packed together, especially when looking at the average and medium performance of players. Red Mage takes the 7th spot, Bard and Summoner are almost tied for 8th, with Dancer in 10th managing to not fall too far behind Bard and Summoner. Machinist is then dead last. Don't be put off Machinist or any job if you like the job, as it's more unviable to get through Savage, but for perspective, the difference between Dancer in 10th and Machinist in 11th is larger than between Monk in 1st and Reaper in 6th. In terms of the absolute maximum damage possible done, Black Mage finds itself pipping Dragoon to top spot by a whisker. However, avoid reading too much into this, as these are usually the product of raid groups creating party makeups or strategies for the sole purpose of getting one player or job to the highest score possible. They are not a good measure for general job comparisons of how a job usually performs. I'll close out with a view of the DPS across each of the individual fights, as if you have a love for stats like me, then you might find it interesting to see where your job excels or where it doesn't. Like and subscribe to complete the duty.